Okay. Okay, thank you for that warning. Okay. Okay, so again, welcome to the AAPI Heritage Month presentation that we're about to embark on. I'm really excited that Amrita Frederick and Lui Abel agreed to co-present with me. When I pitched the idea to John, he was really on board, and we're very excited about what we're going to do today. So before I start on my presentation, I just wanted to sort of let you know what we're going to do and how it's going to flow today. So we are going to have, each of us is going to present some slides, do a brief presentation on different, touching on different topics. And that part is going to be maybe around 15 minutes long. And then afterwards, I mean, really, we would like the rest of it to be discussion. And so we're going to sort of start after the presentations, we'd like to sort of share about ourselves and our experiences. You know, when we started talking about how to organize this presentation, we realized we really didn't know anything about each other's stories, which I think I thought was really important for all of us to be able to hear about each other's experiences, and you know, and talk and get the discussion going. And then we'd really like, you know, the rest of the discussion to include all of you. So we have some discussion points that we came up with, and hopefully it'll be really full discussion. And I just want to say when we start the larger discussion that this is meant to be a safe space for all of us to just be able to share each other's experiences. You know, if at any point anyone feels uncomfortable, you know, just type in, but it's really to get to know more about each other. And that's just kind of part of, you know, becoming a community. So with that, I'm going to start my presentation. So I thought that I would start this program with just sort of giving a very high level history of Asians in America. And that includes how sort of talking about and learning about how different Asian subgroups and populations came to America. Because so much of our history has been invisible in most history books and in schools. So this is what I'm sort of going to be talking about. So according to many sources, Asian people have come to America before 1800s. So there are some sources that say that Filipino sailors actually landed on the shores of what's currently known as Louisiana to work there. And but really the start of the larger groups of Asians in America really started in the early 1800s in what was known as the Pacific Coulee trade. So the Coulee is historically kind of an offensive term for unskilled low-wage laborers, and usually people refer to coolies as people coming from Asian countries. But in the 1800s, there was a global system that lured Asian workers under the guise of labor contracts to become indentured workers. And so, you know, they were brought to plantations that previously used the labor of slaves, Black African slaves and African-American slaves. And this was during the period when the Atlantic slave trade was being dismantled. So they were brought in to, you know, replace the African-American and the Black African slaves. And many of these immigrants were from China. They, you know, were, they had been enduring very poor conditions because of the economic consequences of the British Opium Wars. There were floods and droughts. So many of the earliest immigrants came from China. They were predominantly young single men from lower classes. And they were brought over to work in very hard conditions, in addition to plantations in Hawaii and California. They were also used as miners. They built railroads. They were farmers and factory workers, etc. And so this, brought on this idea of having Asian workers as a source of very cheap foreign and disposable labor. Then the next wave was after the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which I'll talk a little bit about for the next slide. So after the Chinese Exclusion Act, which singled out Chinese immigrants, we next started to see workers coming from Japan, Korea, and South Asia, specifically Indian workers. And they in turn replaced Chinese workers who were no longer allowed to come here as a cheap labor source. So then the next really big wave started after the immigration law reforms after 1965, which all came about as part of the larger Civil Rights Act. And these laws started putting non-restrictive annual quotas of about 20,000 immigrants per country. And so this was really the first time that larger numbers of Asians could come to the US. And it was also the first time that they could come as families. So previously, the men who came from China and, other countries, typically there were other laws that were put in place to discourage women coming over as well. This prevented them from really settling down and having families, and this is also in the context of, in the 1800s, as you probably know, there were laws that also prohibited interracial marriage. So a confluence of all these laws, prevented families from settling here and coming here together. So the 1965 law reform changed that a bit. This was also after 1965 is when the government started encouraging foreign engineers and scientists and others who, had very high levels of education and were skilled. And they wanted them to come to help the US out in the Cold War. And then the next wave was, after from 1975, when we saw many refugees from the Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. Many Hmong people who lived in Laos came to the US through refugee resettlement programs. Okay, so this slide is pretty dense. I included a lot of information, and you don't have to read all. I'm not going to go everything, through everything line by line. We're also going to be able to share these slides with you if you'd like after the presentation. But I kind of just wanted to, and this is, I want to point out, this is not an exhaustive list of particularly of the items on the right. But I just kind of wanted to do an overview of the laws and court cases and policies that you'll see listed on the left side of the slide that were designed to basically control the flow of immigration from Asian countries. At various points in history, you'll see that either, individuals and workers from specific countries were restricted and prohibited from coming here. Again, the Page Act discouraged women from China from coming over, which, skewed the gender ratios and prevented, Chinese people from creating families and settling down. There was the Chinese Exclusion Act, which I think is probably something that many of you might already already be familiar with. And that was the first time that the US had this law that targeted a specific ethnicity from coming to America. And that was in place until, first they excluded the Chinese, and then they restricted Japanese people from immigrating. There were laws that also were designed to prevent people from Asian countries who came here to work the land from fully participating as citizens. They were prevented from gaining naturalization status and being able to own property. And so, the left side has all of these policies and laws and court cases that, that have the effect of preventing Asian people from, really becoming legally a full part of the US. Despite their being brought over to work the land and work these low wage jobs that were very valuable to building the country. And then of course you have the World War II incarceration program of Japanese Americans. On the right side, I thought it was interesting to sort of break down see how the laws and the court cases and policies work hand in hand with, the violence that, either preceded the laws or came after it. And so I'm not going to go into every single detail, but I do want to point out a couple of things that many people may not know about. There was violence, there was harassment. Asian people were driven out of their communities that they built. In 1871, I actually did not know this until recently. There was a massacre in Los Angeles that actually killed 10% of the LA Chinese population. And this came about and was perpetrated by white laborers and who saw the Chinese as taking away jobs. There was also a 3-day anti-Chinese riot in San Francisco that was violent. There were people killed and property destroyed. In 1907, there was a riot in Bellingham, Washington, which was the first known incident of large-scale violence against South Asians. This was just one incident in the early 20th century where workers from specific countries were attacked, were killed, were driven out of their communities, their property destroyed because of these perceptions that they were taking away jobs. They were perpetually seen as foreigners. And I thought it was interesting that in my research about that riot, that it was portrayed as an incident that was spurred on by inflammatory speech of a nativist organization. And so I can't help but think of the parallels with today's climate. The list goes on and on, including current day. But in summary, I think that I kind of wanted to create a very bullet point summary. So I think you can see that the anti-immigration laws directed towards the Asian community, were specifically designed to exclude them and to, most of them referred to Asian immigrants as aliens. So I think that concept continues to this day and is applied to other populations when it comes to immigration. And then of course the court cases were, they had the effect of preventing Asians from fully participating as citizens. You see a lot of racist and xenophobic responses. Primarily when they spark up through history when white Americans saw certain people of certain subgroups becoming successful economically. You see a lot of violence, especially during times of economic and social unrest. where people are targeted because they are seen as competition for jobs that become scarce. And I think Asian Americans have been generally accepted as a cheap labor source to build a country, but yet they're denied entry. They're unable to gain, their full rights until the 50s and 60s, and they are excluded from general society. So the next thing that I wanted to briefly touch on was that despite all these, historical challenges and barriers, there is a growing there's a growing Asian American movement and identity. And I just wanted to highlight this because before the 1960s, most people of Asian descent they refer to themselves by whatever specific subgroup they belong to, like Japanese American or Korean American, Filipino American. And I think that there are some communities that still do that. But the important thing that I wanted to note is that starting in 1968, there became this term Asian American. And, this was in the greater historical context of, various social movements growing and becoming more visible. The term Asian American was actually created by two university grad students. They were student activists, and they wanted to name their group to increase the visibility of activists of Asian descent across all, ethnic subgroups. And so what the idea behind that was that they wanted to bring all these different groups under one umbrella and really increase their political power and increase their visibility as one, one group. When they were working with people who participated in the Black Power movement, for instance, the American Indian movement, the Latinx movement, and so forth. So the idea is that, discrimination against one subgroup generally, doesn't differentiate them from others. And despite any sort of attempts to divide people of different subgroups or different classes, usually, it affects all of us. So, and you saw more of, this growth of the Asian American movement, especially after the Vincent Chin murder in 1982. Vincent Chin was a Chinese American engineer who was killed by two unemployed white auto workers in Detroit in 1982. And they killed him because they mistook him for a Japanese person. And at that time, during the economic recession, the US auto industry was really taking a hit. And the rhetoric was that there was rhetoric that blamed the Japanese for the failures of the auto industry. And so these people, targeted this man, chased him down, and, said that there was eyewitness testimony that said, that it's because of you that we're losing our jobs. So, that's just one illustration of how discrimination and racism against one group, it doesn't prevent people from other groups from being attacked in the same way. So currently, we Asians are a growing population in the U.S. This is I believe this is the latest census data. And it's just important to note here that, within the category of Asian Americans, is about 50 different ethnic groups. And these statistics include those who have been here for generations and were born in the US, as well as those more recent immigrants who are not born here. We wanted to include this slide to show how the population is growing in comparison to others. So Amrita's going to go next, and she's going to talk a little bit about the different challenges and achievements of Asian Americans.
Thank you, Susan. So, I mean, just listening to the history and the overview Susan gave us, it's quite evident to see the challenges that Asian Americans have faced over the years, ever since we landed here, and ever since then. And so one of the main challenges has been the long history of discrimination that started. I mean, you have the Chinese Exclusion Act, then the internment camps during World War II, and the employment discrimination Asian Americans face. And this was a poll that was conducted in 2005, but it still holds true, where Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders ranked way higher in terms of reported incidents of employment discrimination. And following that is the African Americans. And more recently, with the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had so many new hate crimes, different incidents of violence, verbal harassment, and discrimination against the AAPI community. And that has been largely contributed by, the xenophobic comments that have been connecting the virus to our larger community. And another challenge that our community faces is the myth that we are a model minority, which kind of works against us, because we're kind of seen as a group that's well settled, well established, well educated, and that works against us in terms of not being seen as a community that needs more aid and support, and help for different issues that we face. Because, I mean, when you take us as a group, it doesn't represent all the different subgroups and different ethnicities that fall under our main umbrella. And so that kind of works against us. And having this tag attached to us kind of pits us against different minorities and different groups as well, because it says, oh, if these guys can do it, then why aren't you able to? And then that kind of gives it raises different issues on its own. And another thing that brings up is, when you're termed a model minority, it kind of makes you feel like you don't belong. It differentiates you, and it kind of prevents you from having that sense of belonging to the large American population. And you have people who kind of come up to you, and then they don't consider you a true American, because when they ask you, okay, so where are you from? And then if you say, oh, you're from Virginia, or you're from California, or wherever, and then they go on to say, no, but where are you really from? A lot of us Asians, we face that question, and I personally have faced that question as well. So, you kind of pigeonholed into your identity as, from your home country, and not as, an American as such. And another challenge that the AAPI community faces is breaking the glass ceiling. We're slowly starting to see changes in that, where we have representation in leadership roles and senior executive positions. We would like to see more of that, so that our community is better represented, and we will also be acknowledged for our achievements and accomplishments, and get the kind of aid and support we need. And then another challenge we face is bridging the income gap. Over the years, the Asian community has witnessed a widening of difference between the income groups. I mean, you take a look at the image on the side, that's from a recent research, I think in 2015 or 2016. And you see that the Asian community has faced the largest division in terms of income. And you have the really well-established Asian Americans, and then you have other minorities and groups where you have a very high level of poverty, lack of education. So the gap we see has increased tremendously, and how we need to work on closing that gap and making sure that all groups within our community are given the same opportunities to grow together, needs to be addressed as well. And here is a little snapshot of all the people who have worked hard to overcome the challenges that we've faced and who have accomplished so many milestones and have contributed to the success and history of America as well. Susan, do you want me to just go through a little bit of each person, or?
Sure, if you'd like.
Well, I mean, I was actually going to talk about each person, but I think, we have people in the fields of physics. We have politicians who have broken molds. We have people in entertainment. We have actresses. We have athletes. We have Olympic gold medalists. We have doctors and researchers who have helped so much in terms of AIDS research and even in the current coronavirus pandemic. And we have various people, musicians and people in Congress who have created history for our community. And these are just some of the faces who have done that. And with that, I hand the session over to Amy, who's going to talk about some of the current incidents that the community faces.
Terrific, thank you. And this will be a brief segment because I think, that was just an excellent history. Thank you, Susan, for bringing us all up to speed and now to put us into current context, right? And we can, sort of open it up for more conversation in the next few minutes. But this is not going to be shocking to any of us that have been, reading and hearing the news lately that, hate crimes have, really risen and some very aggressive. And I didn't want this to be a sad and painful conversation for all of us. So I didn't really want to list, all the things that have been in the news. So on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see there are just like, a couple of recent incidences that have been, really just horrific, right? Like really bad, aggressive, painful, hurtful things. And most of them are really old people, like it just boggles my mind, what kind of society attacks really old people? That doesn't even make sense to me. But and they're horrific ones. But then if you look on the right-hand side, the types of hate crimes that have been reported, in recent times, this one is particularly for the last year or so, it's not just the physical assaults, of course, which make the headlines, but, the daily assaults that many Asian Americans may encounter, whether it's verbal harassment, shunning, civil rights violations in the workplace, or, refusal of service by a company or a store, even being coughed or spat on, things like that. So the types of hate crimes can vary quite significantly, and it's just to note, it's not just what gets what gets presented in the news, because there may be lots of things that happen that are not in the news, right? Because it's not sadly horrific enough to make the headlines. And then the only other slide I have here Um, I'm not sure why I'm missing. Oh, here we go. So this is just like some charts, and as I was telling Amrita and Susan, I'm a researcher. So, I have to have some bigger views and broader statistics around what's going on. And, the left-hand side is from 2019 to 2020, right? So this is sort of before the full onset of the pandemic. And you can see the terrible blue line going up in New York City, increasing in terms of hate crimes. And what does that mean as it compares to the rest of the cities around the country? And I mean, because it's pre-pandemic, obviously, the climate that we were in, the political stuff, all that stuff, right, has to attribute to that. And in the right-hand side are the more recent data around first quarter 2020 to 2021. And you can see, again, hate crimes for Asian Americans across all the cities. The dark blue bars have just significantly increased compared to a year prior. Right? And again, we hear about the horrendous attacks in Atlanta, right, on all the women there, or many of the women there, uh, and what's going on in that community, and just lots of different aspects of it. But this is, of course, distressing, right, to many of us. Like, what's going on, and how does this happen, right? Or at least these are the questions I ask myself. And in a moment, we're going to give a little bit of a quick history of our own, our own lives. But I've been in this country a really, really long time, and it really makes me ask the question, what's going on, and how does this thing happen? And and I'm sure all of you are asking the same sorts of questions. It just boggles the mind. Um, and obviously today we're talking about Asian American communities, but again, we all can understand and certainly connect that it's well beyond just one group or one population. And then I think I can move on, because since Susan, oh, okay, thank you. To the, so we just have lists of resources. As Susan mentioned, the slide deck will be available to everyone if you just wanted to find out more. But I think we can jump to the next segment, Susan, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah. So thank you, Amrita and Amy, and thank you for everyone for listening. So now we want to get into the discussion and Q&A part of the presentation.
And Susan, I'm sorry, can you stop sharing the screen and then we can see all of us?
Sure. Hang on one second. Let me see how I do that. Okay. Can you see now, or is that I'm still sharing?
You're still sharing.
Oh, stop.
I can stop that.
There you go.
Thank you. Okay. So we wanted to start the discussion part with just kind of us sharing about our own lives. And I'll just, we're going to go in order. So I was actually born in Korea, in South Korea. And I came over to the States when I was 4 years old. My parents actually, they grew up in the same town. They got married, and they decided that they were going to come to the States to try for a new life here. Neither one of my parents grew up, privileged. And they just thought that, they just thought that they would have a better chance of themselves and particularly their children having a better chance of social mobility through education and so forth if they came here versus staying there. My dad actually, grew up with a single mom. He worked his way through college. He had a government job before they emigrated. My mother grew up in a household of, she was one of 6 kids, and she did very well in school. She actually was like one of the top people in her school. But they didn't have a lot of money because her father was a civil servant. All the money that they did have went towards the education of her 2 brothers. The rest were all girls. So, her older brother went to the top university in Seoul, and her younger brother went to a very good university as well. But the girls really had to, figure it out on their own. So my mom went to nursing school. That was actually, the nursing school was through a church. And it was really through my mom and a job opportunity that she got that they came to the States. So eventually, after 2 years, they did bring us over. And, although my mother had a job at a hospital, my father had to start over. And so he worked as, his first job was as a steel worker for a steel company in the Philadelphia area. And the thing about my family history is that a lot of this wouldn't have been possible because without the support of friends that they had here who were already here in the Philadelphia area and connections with the Korean Presbyterian Church. So church was always like a big part of their lives and our lives. It was through the church that, their social system was built. Many Korean Americans of the previous generation, they really didn't have very good opportunities to, unless they already had a lot of money, it wasn't really easy for them to get bank loans and things if they wanted to start their own businesses, which my parents eventually did. So in the Korean American community, there was a system called the GAE system, which is GYE. And it's basically a pool of friends who get together and contribute to money to a fund, and each family takes turns getting the proceeds of the funds that get distributed each month. And so that's how a lot of people, at least in the Korean American community, were able to gain some wealth. So that's sort of my early history, but I know that, my parents would share with me sometimes about some of the racial harassment that they experienced when they came over here. This was in the mid to late 70s. They were in Northeast Philadelphia, and eventually we moved to the suburbs where we were maybe only one of like 2 or 3 Asian American families who lived in that area. But again, my first contact with other Asians and Korean Americans specifically was through church. Yet I didn't know anything about, I didn't know much about, the other Asian American subgroups and, this idea of Asian American history. I had no idea about that until I got to college. And I took an Asian American Studies course. And that was really my first introduction to this concept of having like an Asian American identity and learning about my own history. I mean, I didn't know anything about Asian American history. I didn't know, when the first Asians came. I knew nothing about that because that wasn't taught in even my own, private liberal arts, my liberal high school, which is a Quaker school. So college really introduced me to that. And it was also there that my interest and passion about, creating coalitions really started to take effect. There were other student groups at my college. Like I had a lot of friends in the African American student group and other groups. So that's really how I got introduced to the idea that, all of these different groups who were and social justice groups, including, groups for white students who were interested in, sort of working together against racism and other injustices. That's really where I got introduced to that whole idea. And that's still something that I feel strongly about today. And to me, it's a lot of it is about, educating each other and educating ourselves. And that's a huge part of it for me. Amrita, do you want to go next?
Sure.
Actually, Amrita, would you mind if I went next? Only because I think it's a natural progression into your story. So, so I'm Amy Abel. Thank you, Amrita. I'll make it really quick because Susan's story has a lot of commonalities. I'm Chinese American, by the way, but like Susan, I immigrated with my family here in '76. So we were part of that, opening up with families after the 1965 Act, right? So we came in 76. My father had come to this country 2 years before with extended family, and you can come if you have a job. So families had some sort of business, and then you can apply for sort of like a work visa. So he came 2 years prior, left my mother with 3 children by herself in Hong Kong, and then finally we came over. And my mother, who to this day speaks no English, and she traveled from Hong Kong by herself with 3 kids, including my brother, who was 9 months old at the time, to America by herself. And it was on a Pan Am airline, those of you that remember. So those were fun days. But we, probably like Susan, I think the one difference is I grew up in New York City in Queens, and those of you now know if you go to Queens, it's like completely overtaken by Asians, right, in many, many subgroups. But when I grew up in Queens, there were like 5 Chinese families, and I knew that because we knew all 5 of them, right? And so that was the only way we could connect. And going into public school, I went through all public schools in New York City. I remember like my first grade teacher. I started in kindergarten, and with no English whatsoever, right? And have very little memories, frankly, of it. But in first grade, I still had my Chinese name. And one of the lasting memories I had was my teacher, my first grade teacher, who was a lovely, sweet, kind woman, was thrilled when I came in with a relative and announced that I was changing my name to Amy. She could not pronounce my Chinese name, and it was just really hard. And I get it, I really get it. So she was thrilled just to, be able to remember my name, basically, I think. So these are just some of the funnier stories that I remember, growing up. My parents did not speak English. I think by the age of 9 or 10, I was writing checks for them, and we continued to manage all of their lives in English where they can't. But the good news is that I think I really, unlike Susan, I had a greater appreciation of the Chinese community and even the Asian community, because it continued to grow in New York City specifically. So New York City is obviously, like San Francisco, one of the big hubs for the Asian community. So there was a Chinatown that was thriving and big, and so once a week the family would trek down on the subway from Queens to Chinatown in Manhattan, Lower Manhattan, buy all the week's groceries. Everybody had to carry their own bags, a bunch of bags of groceries, and then we would all schlep it back, which I can't even imagine doing today, right? I struggle with my ShopRite bags out of my garage, my trunk. So, the whole family, everybody had to like shovel all the bags back home and all that stuff. And I did see a question, what was my Chinese name? My Chinese name is Zilan. Zilan. Zi is purple, and Lan is a flower, like a purple flower, so an orchid. So my Chinese name is Purple Orchid Flower. It was very feminine, apparently. My mom gave me the name. So anyways, so it was just, we all survived and did all the things that we did do. But growing up, having stronger Asian presence in New York City, I think helped me with, I would say, slightly less issues around who I was, or I never saw people like myself, because I did. And so I have a slightly different perspective that I know many of my friends that might have immigrated when they were older, like whether they were teenagers or even older, like college or above, kind of people. I literally was practically almost born here. I was 5, right? So I wasn't born here, but it was like I was born here. And I grew up with both identities at the same time. And because I think I was so young, I didn't really struggle with that too much. I knew that in this world, I was very Chinese, and in this world, I was very American. And to this day, I exemplify that. So at work, I'm very American. And then when I go back to my family and Chinese community, my parents, again, did not speak English their whole lives, right? So it's just my mom now. So everything we did was in the Chinese language. We ate only Chinese food. We had, family occasions with all mostly Chinese people. Like it was all, Chinese holidays, traditions, the whole bit. And that was my world, right, in that space. And then I also had this dual world. But because I was so young, I guess I'm grateful that I didn't really struggle, because I think when you're older, you struggle more. I've heard from that, many of my friends, you struggle with that. So, I mean, with that, just in the interest of time, let me pass it on to Amrita.
Thanks, Amy. Well, my story is very different because I am relatively new to the States. I was born and brought up in India, and I was in India for the first 25 years of my life. So all I knew at that time was the country I grew up in. And growing up in India, for us, we used to see United States as this really beautiful country and the land of opportunities and something that we all aspired to move to or be in or visit or something like that. And at that time I had no clue about the different races, the different groups and different identities, nothing. It was just America. And I see a question, Wendy. I was born in Chennai, which is in the south. And my dad used to work in a company that moved us all around India. So I've been to the north, I've been to the central region, and also in the south. So yeah, so 25 years there. My parents, my dad was an engineer and he worked for a power company, and which is why he worked for the public sector. So we too moved to different places. And then I got married in India, and with my husband, and that was my first marriage. Sudhir is actually my second marriage. And we got an opportunity to move to Singapore when I was 25. And so we moved there, and I was in Singapore for about 5 or 6 years. And during that time, got divorced, everything happened, and then that continued on with my life in Singapore. And then in 2010, I was introduced to Sudhir. I was told about this guy who was in the States, and Sudhir was studying and working in America at that time. And then my family knew his family, and then they were like, hey, you know what, there's this guy, you're single there, why don't you talk to him? So then we started talking to each other, and we used to first we started off by emailing each other, and then it moved on to video calls, and then he came over to Singapore to see me, and then the rest is history. We fell in love and we got married. And because of that, I moved to the States to be with Sudhir. And so that's how I came to be in America. And that was in 2010. That was at the end of 2010. And so I've been here for 10 years now. And coming to America was like an eye opener to me, to see all the different people and how the different groups interact and how I am seen as a person as well. I've had great experiences. I've had the opportunity to travel up and down the East Coast and even to the South. We love to travel, so any vacation time we get to go around, and we've had lots of fun just getting to know and getting to see different places and getting to know different people. And but definitely for me, I see myself as a different person. And we're not Americans yet, we're not citizens yet, so we're still in the process of um, uh, getting a green card and everything. So we're still in the immigration process, in the pipeline, if you will. And it's been a very long journey, and it's been longer in recent years too. The path to citizenship has been different, and I mean, it's just part of life, and we accept that. And uh, for me, I feel as an Indian, they kind of identify, people have this perception of us, and that's how they define you. And it's not the same for everybody. There are people who see you differently, and then there are people who have no idea about where you're from. and what your upbringing is. And so I've had questions asked like, oh my gosh, you speak in English so well. There are people who've said that to me. And then at a previous church, there was a church retreat that we had gone for, and then we were all singing "Seek ye first the kingdom of God." So I was singing happily because I knew the song, and then someone next to me taps me and said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know you knew that song." So I've had comments like that, and then there are people who have asked me, "Oh my gosh, you've had hamburgers in India before?" So having these kind of experiences and having people say things like that to me, and it kind of opens your eyes to the fact that you are different. And there's a lot of what would you say, there's a need to be heard and stories to be told, so that it's not like you're a different person, you're not a different entity that's you don't belong here kind of thing. I never felt that I don't belong here, but I do feel I'm different. And I mean, but the majority of my experiences in America, though, have been very, very positive. I mean, the community in St. Luke's and even the other friends we've made, everybody, I mean, there are so many lovely people. There are so many great, great friends we've made. And I mean, we totally love it here. So yeah, that's my story.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think after, like, we just wanted to open it up to, more questions, or if you have any, if anything spoke to you during our presentations. Amrita, I don't know if everyone has the ability to unmute themselves.
I didn't do anything. Let me see. Okay. There we go.
So while you're doing that, I really thank you for sharing your experiences, Amrita, because especially the part of, like, the types of interactions and the questions that you get, because Amy kind of touched on, like, the different forms of how, like, discrimination or racism can pop up in your life. Like, for me, I'm just I've never been physically attacked, but I just remember that I just wanted to share this one anecdote about how this came up in a work situation where this was my first job out of college. I worked for the Legal Aid Society as a housing paralegal in the South Bronx. And we were invited to a big dinner at the Waldorf Astoria that was sponsored by a bunch of, big law firms that, supported the Legal Aid Society. And I was at the table with my attorney in charge. And I remember, being there, and I was like the only, I think I was actually the only person of color at the table, to be honest. This guy came over. He was like the partner of one of the big white shoe firms. And he came over and he, like, sat next to me and he said, "Oh, good. I can talk to you about my trip to, China." And I was like, "Well, actually, I'm Korean." And he took great offense to that. He moved away from me. He, like, didn't sit next to me. He sat at the other end of the table. And I'm looking at my boss, and he, like, looks at me like I did something wrong for speaking up for myself. So, and it wasn't even like I was angry. I was just saying, that's great, but I'm a different, ethnicity. So, it's just things like that, like microaggressions, things like that pop up. That's just one example. So, we were wondering, just to start the discussion.
Susan, I think there are a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Molly has been raising a hand. Wendy, Molly, Jill.
Let's try to take them in order.
I have two brief comments to make. I'm a fundraiser, so I had worked in the foundation at St. Barnabas Medical Center for a while. And while there, my boss, so we would get areas in which we fundraised for. And so one of the areas that I was given was the Center for Asian Health at St. Barnabas Medical Center. So the first thing that I always do when I get into an area that I don't know anything about is, of course, to research. Before I met the woman who is in charge, whose name is Susan Wong, who is possibly, just this force of nature, just an incredible human being. But one of the things that I learned during my preliminary research was that New Jersey has the third largest Asian community in the country. Just absolutely boggled, you know, I just had no idea that that was the situation. So it's Hawaii, it's California, and New Jersey.
Wow.
And that was just amazing to me. And then the second thing is something that Susan pointed out, which was that she did not have an experience or learn about her community until college by taking college courses. I work for public media, and so one of the things that we're doing are these racial trauma programs. And we had to do one for 2 hours, and I went screaming because I just did not have 2 hours to give from my work, but I had to go, and I went. And one of the questions, and it became one of the most powerful experiences that I've had. And one of the questions they asked was, did you have a BIPOC teacher in grammar school? And I answered no. Did you have a BIPOC teacher in high school? And I answered no. And then I thought, I didn't even have it in college. And that everything that I learned about my experience as a Black person in terms of academics was self-taught, and came in graduate school. And I had a professor, a curatorial professor who had us do an exhibition of Black women artists, because I studied art history. And so this whole thing of teaching things about Asian studies, African-American studies, et cetera, is vital to this country, because the fact that I'm not going to give my age, but the fact that that experience, and I grew up in Newark Central Ward, okay? I grew up only knowing Black and Puerto Ricans, quite frankly, and yet I did not have that experience in school. So this is very important, and I thank all of you for doing this.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for that perspective. I hope most of you can continue on with this discussion, because I think it's really great. I think Jill had her hand up next.
And then Molly. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've been called the term like Coulee. I guess that just because of my complexion and my hair, because people have no idea that I'm Nicaraguan. And yeah, I like Amrita, or whoever said, I don't truly feel that. I mean, I am an American citizen, and I've had people who have asked that, because I think they probably think I'm illegal, but no, I'm not. I am a citizen. I practically bought my green card and then became a citizen. But and on my green card, it used to say resident alien. That was the term, on the green card. I think they just change it lately. And I don't feel that I'm a part of this country. I really don't. I mean, when I speak of home, I'm speaking of Corn Island, Nicaragua. That's where I'm speaking of, because that's my happy place. That's where I am accepted. And I get all sorts of stuff. They're like, oh, you have an accent. Where are you from? Well, I have an accent because I choose to have an accent. I've been in this country since I was 13 years old.
13.
Okay. Yeah. So if I wanted to change, my accent, I could have changed. I mean, I just choose not, and I can go deeper back to Corn Island, because Wilfred would say to me, when my family's around and my brother, and I would go right back there, and Wilfred would look at me. He's like, how can you do that? You know, and which exactly. And I mean, you guys would die if you hear Elia. I mean, we spent one summer in Nicaragua, and Elia can talk like Caribbean, like you just don't know Creole. He's like, and then he comes right back to America, which is, yeah. And, you know, so that's just, I mean, I've had like a lot of, you know, stuff towards me. And I mean, I love America for a lot of stuff. I mean, this is where, you know, everything happened in my life, you know, and I have 3 boys who are American, and I love this country for a lot of things, but I don't feel accepted. You know, I had a you know, a lady, one of my students last week, no longer than last week. And of course I was helping this child, and she said to me, she's like, oh, where are you from? So I said, Nicaragua. And then she sounded like she was interested in, you know, like what, and then she just like totally like cut me off. So I was like, why are you asking me where I'm from if you don't care to know where I'm from, you know? And yeah, so anyway, that's my 2 cents about it. And I want you guys to know that we've been celebrating AAPI the entire month in school. So we've been reading, the kids, we read every, you know, like books written by, you know, like Asian American and, you know, Pacific Islanders to the kids, and we discuss them. And, you know, it's so amazing what you hear, you know, like come from kids, you know, it's, yeah. So I just wanted you guys to know that we've been a big part of this whole celebration, you know, since the beginning of May.
Thank you, Jill. I think Diane was next.
Oh,
No, Molly.
Molly was next?
Molly's got a hand raised for a while now.
Anyway, guys, I am just so grateful for all 3 of you for sharing today. First, I just want to acknowledge that Susan, Amy, and Amrita, I pronounce, if I screw up your name, just
That was
yeah.
perfect.
All right. First of all, I'm upset with you guys that you didn't even put Bruce Lee on the picture. Hey, I'm a big karate fan, and you didn't put Bruce Lee on there. So, you know, but you know, I just wanted to share some highlights based on the fact that I'm a Jamaican immigrant. I came here when I was 15 years old. So to Amy's point, when you come younger, it doesn't affect you as much as when you come in your teenagers or a bit older. Susan, you mentioned about, I think it's a gay system or the game system. We have those in the Caribbean also, and I think in other places around the world, when the banks won't lend you money to do your business or buy a house, we have, in Jamaica, we call them partners. They still operate right here in America for all the Caribbean families that need that system in order to buy their first home. That's how they buy their first home, because they've been discriminated against by the banks for so long. Second thing, the dual citizenship, the dual life that Amy was talking about. Amy, I know what you mean about living the 2 life, going now, as Jill was saying about speaking one language, English, versus speaking your own language and living that life. I can switch up in a minute because we know how to code. We know how to survive in the United States of America, okay? One history, Amrita, is the fact that my great-grandfather was Indian.
Wow.
Because there's a mixture of, you know, in Jamaica, the heritage and our motto is, out of many we are one. And, you know, there's a lot of people that come to Jamaica and stay even before, you know, even after the slave trade came there. But feeling, as you said, that you're a different person, it kind of hurt my heart to hear you say that. Because I know the terms about that we were called coolies. And Jill, you have heard that. My grandmother has heard that. I have heard that even as a child in Jamaica. You've heard that. And it hurts my soul, as Wendy was saying, the education system in these United States does not lend the knowledge to where we don't consider ourselves different. Because they consider us different, and because it's a privileged society, they don't have to learn anything about us. They don't have to learn that it's because of our family, our ancestors, this United States was built. I'm not saying no white person built anything, but it was on the cheap labor or no labor at all, or the labor of not paying its economics, that these United States were built. And for even up until this day, I have friends. I grew up in Fort Lee, and we call that the United Nations, because I have friends from Korea, Thailand, all over, Italians, every place that you can think of came to Fort Lee High School. And it's sad when we as a people still don't know about each other because of the narrative that the white supremacist attitude of America is that they don't even teach anybody about the history, about the transcontinental slave trade. They don't teach about the Asian migration. They don't teach anything that would put them in a bad light. It's the most unfortunate thing. And it's a matter of control because they control the narrative. So I just want to celebrate you ladies for sharing that history because it's powerful and we need to know that as a people so we can learn each other's story and we can grow from there, because if you don't love your neighbor as yourself, you can't love anybody else.
Amen.
Well said.
Thank you, Molly. I mean, just before we go to Diane, I just wanted to say, I mean, just hearing everybody share, I realize how important it is to have conversations, because I mean, that's the only way we get to know each other. Because before Susan asked me to join this adult forum, I had no idea about all the history behind the Asian American community here. And just learning and just listening and reading, that's how I got to know about the oppression over all these years and how my experience is not very unique. It's what everybody feels around here. I mean, there's so many people who feel the way I do over here. And having conversations is the essential bit on how we can, come together as a community and, grow together, I guess. Sorry, Diane.
Diane and Nesta both have their hands up too, so.
Okay, actually, at first, thank you so much for pulling this together. And so Susan, Amy, and Amrita, I really appreciate it. I have to say that I'm definitely a product of the public school system in the US. And until probably 15 years ago, I had no idea about the Asian Exclusion Act or even the restriction. I had met a guy that was half Indian, from his father was from Bangladesh, and he married a Black woman from the US. And then is when I learned, and this is just 15 years ago, and I started getting to know the culture a little bit, and then didn't understand what was happening with the immigration laws. So I did put into the chat a link, and thank you, Susan, because I agree. The other one is, there's one PBS series on Asian Americans, and there's one about the Chinese Exclusion Act. Both of them are really good. I mean, and over this last year, I've been so informed by finally an awareness being raised about the Asian American experience, because I was clueless. I had no idea about all the parallels between Asian Americans and African American experience, had absolutely no clue. I'm thinking we're the only ones who were beat up in this country. And I'm so wrong. So I think sharing this information is really valuable. And I agree with you, Molly, the school system, we've got to do something different in educating people. Even just last week, I don't know if you know the woman, I can't remember her name, but a Black woman writer got a Pulitzer Prize, and she teaches right now at UNC. She was denied tenure because she started the 1619 project with the New York Times. That's ridiculous. That's
Are you crazy? Hannah was denied tenure?
Yes, she was denied.
Oh my God.
Yes, she went
Yeah.
all through the entire process and got to the Board of Trustees. The Board of Trustees said they didn't like her work on the 1619 project, so they came to a compromise, and she's on a 5-year, I guess.
Contract, a
Yes.
5-year contract, yeah.
So here we are further restricting the information that is shared out here. It's crazy. So thank you. We need more conversations like this so we educate ourselves.
Thank you so much, Diane. Nesta?
I just wanted to piggyback on Molly. I'm a descendant, first generation American with parents from Jamaican descent. And I'm a product of what we say, from many there are one. My background, my parents, they were slave traders from Wales that brought Africans to Jamaica, who are my grandfather's side on my mother's side. And my father was pure African descent, whose great grandmother was an English woman who married. So my mother came to the States. She was recruited, which is what they did back in the day, to bring West Indian Jamaicans into Montclair to work for the Upper Montclair aristocrats who came in from New York City, who wanted to live in the mountains of Upper Mountain Avenue. So because my mother looked white and my father was dark, I was called a mulatto. And I didn't know what that was until I went to school. And the teachers asked me, well, what is your mother? She's a white lady. What, are you adopted? So it just, going forward, I had to deal with those things. And what kind of name is Nesta? Are you related to Bob Marley? Because his middle name is Nesta. And I'm like, maybe I could be. But, working in corporate America, and I was a manager, and the president of the division I worked for said, oh, I heard that you said you were Jamaican. You don't have an accent. I said, well, yeah, but I'm Jamaican. He said, well, I didn't know you were one of those island people. And I told him, I said, it's those island people who are the home health aides who go out and work and make you rich, and they're taking care of our folks. And these are people who really should be retired, and you're paying them nothing to go out and do this work. And of course I was reprimanded, but it didn't matter because I said my piece. But those are things that it's not that far back. It still goes on. And I know that the schools don't teach it, but we have to have dialogue with our kids and our grandchildren and tell these stories so that they will understand how to deal in the world, because it's not easy for them right now. They're in a multicultural environment, and pandemic has kind of separated that, and we need to help them understand how to deal. So ladies, I thank you for bringing this together. This was so great. I appreciate you giving us the audience, and I hope that we can continue these dialogues.
Absolutely. We would love to. I would love to see that happen. And thank you, everyone. I don't know if anyone else wanted to chime in, but I'm really hoping that we can all continue this conversation. And thank you so much for being here and participating too.
Susan, before you go, to continue the conversation next month, Sandra Mordecai, and we're rustling up a couple of other people from the Caribbean to join us to have a similar dialogue about the Caribbean heritage, because there are some discussions that slavery wasn't that bad in the Caribbean. So we're going to have that conversation next month.
Great. Awesome.
Look at the movie A Long Song on PBS. That
Oh my gosh.
Story of the slave uprisings prior to the uprisings in the United States.
So we're going to need that information, and anyone would like to join us, reach out to me, and we'll have those discussions. Please, because if we don't educate ourselves, as Wendy said, and everyone has said here, it's in the sharing of our stories that we get transformation. And St. Luke's is not a cathedral, but a community of believers in Jesus Christ. And Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. I'm going to hold everybody accountable for that, including myself. So next month, we're going to be celebrating and having the discussion about Caribbean History Month. So we're going to talk about the
Okay.
historical facts of the transatlantic slave trade.
Thank you, Molly.
Terrific. Thank you. And let's
Thank you
continue
you,
to.
so much,
guys.
everyone.
Thank you so much.
Lovely to
Okay.
see you guys and
Have a
hear
good
you
one.
guys.
you
Thank
guys.
you.
Bye-bye.
Nice
Bye.
job. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.